Just to let you know, we are going to be recording this webinar, and that's of course because we want to share it more widely after the session with wider colleagues, with other colleagues from across the EU. So what I wanted to do today is perhaps introduce a little bit about the webinar and what you can expect, and also the people that will be involved. But first of all, my name is Elin McCallum. I work in entrepreneurship education, in entrepreneurial learning, and have done for many years. It is my topic of passion, and I'm very pleased to be able to introduce today the conversation that we're going to have around EntreComp, which is for me a really very useful framework explaining what do we mean about being entrepreneurial, what is it in that broadest sense in terms of the key competence for relevant to sort of creating value for life, for our society, for our communities, for our work, and potentially for creating our own job in the future. So working with young people, adults across Europe to develop that key competence. The EntreComp framework provides a structure for that. So I'm very pleased that today we're going to be exploring that framework, and we've got two people with us to help us to do that. And this is all in the context of the European Schoolnet and DG Education work on supporting networks across Europe, and this has been developed as part of the School Education Net Gateway collaborative space on entrepreneurship education. So this is an open discussion forum, information resources forum that's freely available, openly accessible to any type of organization, and we'll be sharing the links to that space throughout the webinar and certainly in the follow-up. And I would encourage you to join up or just go along, have a look to see what's there. Of course, we have significant resources and information around EntreComp too. So the two people we have joining us today will be firstly Margherita Bacigalupo, who is the author of EntreComp, the Entrepreneurship Competence Framework, and works within the Joint Research Centre, part of the European Commission. She's led the development of this framework, working with experts from across Europe. I don't need to say more. I know that she will share information on this herself. And secondly, we'll be talking to Tomislava Recheva, who is from the European Schoolnet organization here in Belgium, and she leads has led the iLink project, and she will tell you all about that and how they have used EntreComp and her perspectives on how this can really impact on policy, because this is what this next hour is about, is exploring EntreComp and how it can be useful at the policy level, which is so important when we look at scale and impact. But I think without further ado, I will hand over to Margherita Bacigalupo, who is based in Sevilla, so joins us from there. Hi, Margherita. Very pleased to have you with us. And she will take you through the introduction of the what, the why, the how, a little bit of EntreComp, Europe's Entrepreneurship Competence Framework. Thank you.
Thanks to Elin, to European Schoolnet for organizing this webinar, and especially to anyone who's has joined to learn together how to foster entrepreneurial learning through the use of EntreComp. I've prepared some slides that I think I can manage myself. Yes. Well, the JRC, you can, if you can see me through the webcam, I'm the crazy scientist. You can say from the air. We are based. The JRC is the research arm of the European Commission, so we do research and support to policy making, and my unit is based in Seville, where not only the EntreComp work has been carried out, but also the previous and still ongoing work on the Digital Competence Framework. A bit of background on EntreComp and entrepreneurship in lifelong learning. I guess that being policymaker in the field, you all know that in 2006 that there was a recommendation by the Council on the key competencies for lifelong learning that were setting 8 key competencies, among which sense of initiative and entrepreneurship. And you also know that 10 years after, the Eurydice published a report on the state of play in entrepreneurship education at school in Europe, I see that among the participants there is also Anya Bourgeois, who led that work, and so maybe she can intervene if she has something to say at any point in time. But what the situation was in 2015 when the study started was that the landscape in Europe was pretty scattered, and there was a different understanding of entrepreneurship education, entrepreneurial learning, entrepreneurship as a competence across country, across levels of education, not to mention beyond the formal education world to cover the non-formal learning, inclusion, or employment setting. So the reason why creating a European reference framework is motivated by the fact that there was a need to harmonize the understanding of entrepreneurship as a competence, and the framework came with the intention to create a common language. So a common language embracing lifelong learning from all sectors of education and beyond formal education to encompass non-formal and informal learning. So the definition had to be broad, comprehensive, descriptive, clear, understandable by all players in the field, but in no way prescriptive. So EntreComp is, if you have had the time to have a look at it, it can be off-putting, because if you take the annex to the report, is a big table with 442 learning outcomes, but is not meant to be read from learning outcome 1 to 442. As I always say, and those who have already participated to any talk in which I was describing in the framework, it's like a dictionary. Nobody reads the dictionary from the first entry to the last one. We use a dictionary to clarify concepts that we are not sure about, and the principle is a bit the same. So the EntreComp is a reference document that you can refer to clarify things, and as like the words in the dictionary, they take sense, they become meaningful in a context. So EntreComp has to be put in context. Up until 3 weeks ago, this was a lot of talk on our side and exchange of practices, but finally we have come out with a publication in which I must say that a large part of the work, the largest part of the work, was possibly done by Elin McCallum, because she was the lead author of this work, the EntreComp into Action Guide, which compiles a series of take-up of the framework, 70 something, that give you a very clear idea of how EntreComp is meaningful when it becomes used in different contexts. And in different contexts, it can be used in very different ways. I think I will skip this and go directly to this slide, in which I think is the reason why also DGEAC wanted this topic to be addressed right now, is that there is a lot of emphasis, reviving, new vibe of emphasis on the entrepreneurship competence, on the key competence in general, because the 2006 recommendation is has been revised. The new proposal has been submitted to the Council by the Commission in February and is currently in debate. There is a fine-tuning of the definition, but basically adoption is expected in May. We can safely, I believe, say that the final document will refer for entrepreneurship competence to the EntreComp framework. In as much for digital competence, it refers to digital competence, and for languages, it refers to the framework for foreign language that has been out far longer than the digital and entrepreneurship competence one. So now is the time to get back into the details of competence frameworks in light of what will be the new emphasis with the key competence recommendation 2.0, let's say. Also, I think that special emphasis will be put in the upcoming months on this framework due to the call by the European Education Area communication, call to member states to further their cooperation on curricula. So one of the European education area is to be further developed, but the communication states that the Commission invites member states to further collaborate on this topic, and there are plenty of or reasonable amount of platform for this collaboration to happen. So it's expected that this the EntreComp, together with the other competence framework that are already available, will be under the spotlight. So we are anticipating a bit the time, but surely we are in a key moment for this discussion. So what is very important to clarify is that the EntreComp is based on a very broad definition of entrepreneurship. So its first aim is to create a common language between the world of education and the world of work, let's say. And this definition has to be fit for both worlds and not impose one view on the other. So this definition is the one we found best fitting the purpose, and it comes from the work of the Danish Foundation for Entrepreneurial Learning, which states that entrepreneurship is when you action upon opportunities and ideas to transform them into value for others. Value that can be financial, cultural, or social. So it's much more than setting up a business. It can be activism, it can be political participation in running for election, it can be any form of value creation where value has to be created for others. So in a school setting, this entails that is not making the teacher happy with your drawings in primary school, but is drawing something to make an exhibition in the neighborhood where the school is, so that the community benefits from it. So it's opening up the school to the external world, creating value that can be cultural or social, but is not caged into the interaction between teachers and students, let's say. Also, the emphasis on you, entrepreneurship is when you act, in this English use is very important to understand that it addresses both the individual and the collective competence. So when you will see the framework, if you haven't seen it yet, you will see that it's a broad variety of competencies, but it might as well be distributed among different actors depending on the level of complexity. The basic elements of EntreComp is that is 3 areas of competencies, one dealing with ideas and opportunities, one dealing with resources, meaning personal and external resources, and one dealing with the turning into action of the ideas and opportunities. So we can open up our wheel and find the 15 competencies that make up the framework. And you will see that in the ideas and opportunities area, you have things like creativity, vision, spotting opportunities, being able to identify the unmet needs, the challenges that are laying out, things that need a solution, and then generate multiple alternatives, options to address those challenges, and then evaluate, value those ideas and understand those who have the potential to make a difference, build a vision on those, not discarding the analysis of the impact on the larger community, including the environment. So this part, the blue part, is dealing with generating and selecting ideas. Then there is the part of transformation through a lever of transformation that is a set of levers that can be personal, and these I refer to motivation and perseverance, self-awareness and self-efficacy, so more attitudes, and others that are more skills and knowledge from financial and economic literacy, so being able to manage the budget of your project, whatever project it can be, even planning your holidays somewhere requires financial and economic literacy, or setting up a campaign to advocate against period poverty. And I'm thinking about Amica George, which is who is a young and 18 years old girl who has been able to set up a very transformative movement in UK to raise policymaker awareness on the problem of young girls missing school because of not being able to afford hygienic products to go to school when they are on their period. And so the ability of mobilizing others and mobilizing of resources of Amica George is always something that I have clearly in mind as an example of how entrepreneurial learning is beyond setting up a business and applies also to teenagers who have a vision and have an idea they want to pursue. And then there is the part of turning these ideas into action that deals more with the competencies like planning and managing, actually taking the initiative to transform the opportunities into value-creating activities, the capacity to cope with ambiguity, uncertainty, and risk, working with others, and I say it last, but the entire entrepreneurial learning process is focused on this, is learning through experience. So it's not only taking the lesson learned throughout the process, but also considering the entire process a learning experience. Elin, do you want to ask me a question now, or someone has a question at this point in time? I go on. So the framework.
Sorry, Margherita, I was muted.
Do you have questions?
Sorry, Margherita, I was muted for that. Please go ahead.
Okay, so the framework provides a lot of details. So these are tables that describe the hints and description for each of the 15 competencies. But beyond the description of these, there are thematic threads that explode, let's say, each competence in themes. Like, for instance, creativity is divided in 5 themes: being curious and open, develop ideas, define problems, design value, be innovative. And each of the 15 competencies does the same, as different themes pertaining to it. Normally is between 3 and 5. Each of these threads, thematic threads, leads to learning outcomes that are mapped on a progression model based on 8 steps, starting from a foundation level that relies on the support from others to an expert level where the learner is expected to achieve learning outcomes, allowing her or him to drive transformation, innovation, and growth. So this progression model is the way we were able to instantiate the lifelong learning perspective, and so showing that there is a breadth of expertise that can be at any level one person is at any point in time in their learning pathway, they can always go a step forward. And sometimes if they are at the basic level, they will need a safe environment where to discover and explore. If they are building their own independence, they will rely on less support. They will start experimenting. And as far as they become more responsible for their own action in value creating, their expertise grows and may even reach a transformative level. So that's why if you map this 8-level progression onto the threads that match the 15 competencies, and overall they are 60, you end up with some gaps that we have left because it was not meaningful for some competencies to cover all 8 levels of expertise. You get to a table that is made of 442 learning outcomes. One example in this slide is here. So if we are looking at the area ideas of opportunity, the competence creativity, and the threads developing ideas, you can start from a very basic level, saying I can develop ideas that solve problems that are relevant to me and my surroundings, and here you rely on support from others, so the context is set and someone is providing support in this process of developing ideas, to the maximum level of expertise that we have been faced, that is, I can design new processes to involve stakeholders in generating, developing, and testing ideas that create value. So the level of complexity is extending. What is clear is that these or should be clear, and I want to clarify that these learning outcomes are detailed but still generic. So they have to be tailored to the needs and the context. So if we take, I can design new processes to involve stakeholders in generating, developing, and testing ideas that create value, is very different if you are a policymaker in the world of education or if you are a team leader within a food manufacturing industry company. The actual things that you will do will be very different, but still it's about developing ideas to a level of expertise that is very expert. Okay, we have published this user guide that I think you have had a link to access, that provides examples of use of EntreComp fitting to different domains. So the guide is explicitly designed to be relevant for those who work in the different domains. So policymakers, for instance, could be working in the field of education, but also in the field of inclusion, youth work, non-formal learning, or working more on employability, employment policies, or even SME support policies. And each of these actors will find examples collected in the guidelines that clarify how the EntreComp can serve purposes in all of these domains. So for me, it's very straightforward, but I want to emphasize that EntreComp is a tool. So you have to have your goal. Anyone who wants to use it as you use it as to use it as a hammer. You want to hang a frame on the wall of a picture, and then you need a hammer to nail down the nail, but you don't need a hammer for the sake of the hammer. So if you don't have a frame to hang, the hammer is useless. And indeed, the EntreComp and the guide is structured along different type of goals that you may want to pursue in your own duties and in your own value creation activities. So you may want to mobilize interest on entrepreneurship education. You may want to make a difference by creating new value by using the EntreComp. You may want use the EntreComp to appraise and assess where you stand, or use it as a guide to implement initiatives, or even use it to a more fine-grained level to have the recognition of learning outcomes, to tailor learning outcomes definition based on the progression and the examples that are in the framework to do specific recognition. So depending on the goals, you will look at the EntreComp at different level of granularity. So we have seen that there is the closed wheel or the open wheel with the competencies, the threads, the progression levels, the learning outcomes. If you just want to if your goal is to mobilize interest, to establish a partnership task force debating the role of entrepreneurial learning in your context, then you don't absolutely do not need to enter the level of detail of learning outcomes. That's not the purpose. The purpose is, if you want to mobilize interest around value creation intending in the way that is proposed by the framework, then the 3 areas and 15 competencies are the level that might be more relevant. Else, depending on the level of granularity, of specificity of your project, you can go in further detail. And again, I hardly believe that there is anyone dealing with at the same time with all 8 levels of progression and with the entire set of competencies. However, the dictionary is available. So I would like to make some quick examples to give you an idea of what is happening around the EntreComp and how different entities have used it for policy purposes, policy development purposes. For instance, in Greece, there has been an adaptation of the framework that was meant, it was a translation and adaptation, because the framework is only available in English by the Commission, and then it's been translated in other languages by either member states or by intermediary institution like the ETF, which is not an intermediary, but we have in the audience some colleagues working in the European Training Foundation supporting partner countries in developing their entrepreneurial learning roadmap, let's say, and they have done translation. Translating is not an easy job because the framework is complex. The differences, linguistic differences across the level of progression are subtle. So in most cases, it requires subject matter experts that are expert of in the context. So, for instance, one thing that happened in the Greek context is that if you translated entrepreneurship into the Greek correspondent, you would have cut out the entire education domain, because in the Greek context, entrepreneurship is understood only as business. It has only a business connotation. So they had to translate in being enterprising, something like this. I think there are some Greek colleagues in the audience, so they might have a say on this. But the purpose was to make the framework available so that debate could start. So value creating by translating and mobilizing, having the tool available. In Finland, it has been used in a completely different way. It's been used to guide an exercise of evaluation of VET and higher education provision. The agency that pertains to the Ministry of Education that carries out the evaluation of VET and higher education has used the EntreComp as a reference to understand the state of play in Finnish education, to understand what works, and to tailor evaluation methods to the different contexts. Other example, now these first two examples are in a way starting from scratch. Now there are a couple of more examples that build on extensive previous work. For instance, this entrepreneurial school in Luxembourg is an endeavor of transforming secondary education in Luxembourg through the use of EntreComp to cover all the competencies across topic, across subject in school, by introducing challenge-based learning, opening the classroom to external speaker, bringing students in company visits, identifying the learning outcomes that can be recognized through national certification. This is a big exercise. And it's a big exercise that builds on the successful work of a Youth Start project, an Erasmus Plus funded project, the biggest policy experimentation in the field that has used randomized controlled trial, has provided convincing results on the impact that entrepreneurial learning education can have, especially on student engagement. And on this basis, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Employment have shared a vision and engaged all the relevant actors to build these entrepreneurial schools. Likewise, in Montenegro, with the support of ETF and CISL before that, a policy-led step-by-step approach has been taken, which has been supported by the National Partnership on Entrepreneurial Learning and by these two external multinational organizations, CISL, the South European Entrepreneurial Learning Center, and the European Training Foundation. to bring their effort a step forward, but they are building on more than 10-year work on entrepreneurship education. They have been recognized and awarded prize for their systemic approach to fostering entrepreneurial learning. And so EntreComp has come at a certain point in time to help them in go to a finer grain of detail and to identify priorities among the different competencies to go a step forward. One key message that comes from the Montenegro experience is that it's very important since things are developing very fast in this field. And for instance, a big challenge is the assessment of the entrepreneurial learning. And there are many, many projects developing assessment and self-assessment tools. It's important to consider also the endeavor of promoting entrepreneurial learning as something that is an open path in which learning is a continuous process. In Extremadura, another example that is regional, it's the same thing. More than 10 years experience in promoting entrepreneurship as a pedagogy across level of education. A wealth of educational resources produced in these more than 10 years. Close collaboration, so the creation of an ecosystem of actors that all collaborate to achieve the same goal, and the use of EntreComp that comes as an instrument to reflect on where they stand. So now it's being used to streamline the educational offer, the different initiatives, and also to understand which educational level should, what are the frontiers between progression levels and how they map on educational levels. Then there are, in the guide, if you have the time to look at it, there are a wealth of other resources beyond the one that are more focused on policies that address educational programs and resources, and that many of them are funded by the Erasmus Plus project platform, let's say, strategy. I don't know, maybe it's the time for Elin to ask a question or from someone from the audience, or to go to the iLink presentation by Tomislava, which is one here of the project that is the first project turning EntreComp into action and creating learning resources.
Thank you, Margherita. I think that what you presented there is a really broad representation of how EntreComp can be used at policy level, and also some of the tools and projects that are out there to help do that and to illustrate how this is perhaps happening at a smaller scale. I think there's some really exciting developments happening. Finland's national evaluation approach. Luxembourg, they're exploring national qualifications on skills and looking at using EntreComp to really assess those. Montenegro, they want to embed EntreComp across the whole education system, essentially, to ensure that that key competence really is coming through the learning experience for students. And Extremadura, you know, a very interesting initiative there where they want to make sure that they're creating opportunities for learners to develop all these skills, but also in a real kind of cross-community approach. They've got a very big emphasis on bringing in parents through into the education process, but also enabling them to understand how to develop these skills as well. And I think that's really crucial to look at this cross-sectoral approach that you see so often, and perhaps sometimes within entrepreneurship education we focus on the importance of business, and they are really important. Everyone needs to secure their own economic future. We need to think about what the labour market needs, but it really is opening up entrepreneurial learning as a tool for societal growth, for cultural growth, for projects that really can make an impact in that way, as well as then developing the skills you need for employability and life. I had a lovely conversation with a group of students from Swansea in Wales, and they told me it shouldn't be called EntreComp. And these kids were 15, 16 from a valley school in South Wales. It should be called LifeComp, and I have to say I could not agree more. Now I haven't shared my webcam here. Here we go. Apologies for that. Hello again. So thank you very much, Margherita. Does anyone have any questions that we can answer for Margherita right now? Please put them into the chat box down below. Of course, we'll be sharing presentations through the collaborative space. We will share the link to that for you, but if you Google School Education Gateway, you'll find it, and if you look at the collaborative spaces within there, you'll find it. All of this is open access, but obviously we'd like you to sign up, because then we can communicate with you about these developments directly as new initiatives come online, as new information comes online. Okay, so what I think is we can save up some questions, because people are still thinking, still contemplating. For the next session, is there anything you want to add before we move to Tomislava's presentation? Margherita, is there anything that you'd like to contribute, just as a sort of a closing thought? From what's the most important thing for you when considering EntreComp at a policy level? What do you think is the one sort of message you'd like to leave behind for policymakers listening to this presentation today?
Well, my message is each of us can be entrepreneurial. So policymakers can and are called to make a difference and create value for others. So the first way to approach the EntreComp before trying to change the world is look at it from your own point of view and see how it can make you think about your own competencies to create value. This is a very quick and dirty approach to look at it in a personal way, and then you will find ways to turn it into action if it fits your goals.
And that's it. Okay, thank you very much. We will now move to Tomislava, who represents European Schoolnet. She has been coordinating the iLink project, which has been a big project over the last few years, looking at supporting young people in terms of their digital entrepreneurial competence development. But Tomislava will tell you more. She's next to me here, and I'm really pleased that you can be involved, Tomislava. So thank you very much, and I will leave you to listen to Tomislava's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elin. I hope everyone can hear me and see me. Okay. So I was invited today to share the experience of iLink in terms of putting EntreComp into action. And I will just start very quickly with a few words on the project of iLink. I cannot move my slides right now. Maybe I can get them here. Okay, yes, it's fine now. Thank you. So iLink is an online platform which aims to gather different stakeholders together, stakeholders which are basically working in the area of boosting young people with digital entrepreneurial skills with the aim of ultimately making them employable and boosting their employability. So this online platform aims to facilitate discussions and collaborations through different online and offline activities. So the project went really beyond just the platform, which offers communities, learning opportunities, resources, stakeholders database, and a policy hub. But beyond that, there were so many other collaborations between best practices and projects, a lot of them in the area of entrepreneurship education, which are also visible and showcased within the platform. But within this context, we also had the aim to offer and to generate courses and events which would showcase and display innovative pedagogical approaches identified through policy and practice. And that's why we came about to create the iLink MOOC on boosting a sense of initiative and entrepreneurship in your students. And the idea is there was to start from EntreComp and to show teachers which were from primary, secondary education, also vocational training, to show them that entrepreneurship is not only about business. And so we thought that EntreComp is the tool for us to broaden their understanding of the issue and to show them how they can try to introduce entrepreneurship in their classroom, but at the same time reflect on their own skills and abilities on teaching more entrepreneurially. So that was just one of the promotion visuals that we had in order to provoke teachers to start thinking already, even before the actual start of the MOOC, to start thinking beyond just entrepreneurship as creating a startup or creating an enterprise and making business plans. It's also about creativity and making things happen. And the MOOC was based entirely on EntreComp. It follows the structure of EntreComp, and it focuses, every section of the MOOC focuses on one competence from the framework. It lasted for over a month, in February, April 2017, and we had teachers from all over Europe participating in this MOOC. The idea behind it was to first show them the importance of fostering a sense of initiative and entrepreneurial mindset, but also allow them to explore different approaches to introducing entrepreneurial learning and teaching, and to particularly try experimental learning and challenge-based learning. As part of the MOOC, we had a lot of online collaborations and discussions, which were facilitated through the entrepreneurial teachers community on iLink. And there we really try to focus on the exchange of the experience of teachers. So not only about submitting tasks, but also about reflection on the different tasks and how this is relevant for their context, or how this is relevant for their classroom in particular. So from the beginning, we try to, in a way, to inquire what are the different attitudes and what's the state of entrepreneurial education in their country, region, or school. And the answers were various. Some teachers admitted that entrepreneurship education is gradually being introduced. Others had no experience with that so far. In other countries, like Estonia, for example, we see here on the slide, entrepreneurial education has already been included as a cross-curricular approach. In others, although there was a strategy, there was no guidance in terms of how teachers should approach this in the classroom. So we really realized that there is a need of support in terms of guiding teachers and educators on how to actually start introducing entrepreneurship education in their classroom. And in a way, we thought that boosting their confidence is also very important, because even if they had already implemented some of these or fostered some of these skills and competencies within their students, they had not realized that this is actually entrepreneurial learning in the sense that we describe through EntreComp. And of course, EntreComp was instrumental in doing this, in opening this whole new world of skills and competencies that they are already familiar with, but they are not really reflecting upon in terms of entrepreneurial mindsets. And following the results and the feedback from the MOOC, we also decided to create a toolkit with different entrepreneurial teaching and learning activities, which would help teachers further after the MOOC. Some of these activities were part of the MOOC, others were collected through different experts and educators afterwards. So that's how EntreLearn came about. And seeing from the name, you can already know that it was mainly inspired by EntreComp, and it's again trying to map different activities to the different competences within the framework. The interest was quite high, so we tried to even translate it from English to Spanish and Italian, of course, with some help in terms of contextualizing some of the terms and concepts. And yeah, we see so far that teachers and educators are very interested in that, and they still continue to look for the toolkit and to visit the MOOC and try to make sense of what they need out of this. Of course, we decided to give them the broad view, but that doesn't mean that they should really implement everything. They should focus on everything. We really highlighted the importance of contextualizing activities within the classroom and within the national context. So just a few remarks and, let's say, reflections from our side, from the project side, in terms of how EntreComp was useful and how it could be actually useful for policymakers. First of all, for us, it was very important to give the broad understanding of entrepreneurial education and entrepreneurship in order to allow teachers to compare and to evaluate their experience against the experience of other teachers around Europe, which is very important because this is in a way learning from experience, the experience of yourself and the experience of others, and it makes them improve their own teaching strategies within the classroom. And of course, it's very difficult to evaluate whether the MOOC and the toolkit had any impact on policy making yet, because they happened last year, and as you know, policy making takes more time. But I can definitely say that it's a nice indicator, it's a nice experiment to see, to actually highlight the need between what actually teachers have right now, what are the differences between their understanding and their needs, and how these can be addressed with tailored strategies. And that's one of the good things about EntreComp. Although it gives a broad and a common understanding of the topic, it also very much allows for tailoring. As Margherita already said, you can use this dictionary the way you want and the way it is useful for you. So I think that it's the fact that it allows for comparison on a national and international level, but at the same time, it really gives the tools to create more tailored strategies towards, let's say, in our context, supporting teachers with professional development. It's really important, and that's one of the main, let's say, advantages of the framework, that it really gives a common understanding of entrepreneurship as a transversal competence, and it really allows for exchange of best practices and comparison, as we see in EntreComp Into Action, where we can really learn from the experience of each other, all the projects and organizations who have used the framework in one way or another. One other very important aspect for us was the fact that it also brings also to the policy floor for discussion topics such as social entrepreneurship and active citizenship, and in a way it highlights entrepreneurship education as a way also to motivate and to engage students, which is very useful these days when we try to tackle early school leaving and student engagement. So I think in this case, EntreComp could also be very useful. And last but not least, as I already mentioned this, it's a nice tool to compare and to assess different strategies, talking on, let's say, more assessment of strategies on national level and between countries, because seeing what works in one country, of course, may not work in your own country, but at the same time, every time we can learn from the experience of others. So yes, that's my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I give the floor to Elin again.
Thank you, Tomislava. That was really interesting, and I think what that illustrates is that you know, EntreComp is something that can be made relevant to different contexts. And also, I think, reflecting back on the work that iLink have done, both at policy level, but also with teachers and with schools, you know, it brings up these ideas of how the policy level can help to scale this up, can help to explore its relevance within the work that they're doing at government or regional level. So what I'd like to do now is to, first of all, say thank you to Tomislava, of course, but I think really have a little conversation, hopefully through chat, about, well, what is it that would be interesting from your perspective about EntreComp? What you've heard today is, well, we've explored EntreComp in the terms of what is the framework that's there. You've understood that this is around a dictionary, a toolbox of, at the top level, it's very much a simple an explanation of what we mean by being entrepreneurial in a learning context, and how can we create that common understanding, perhaps to mobilize others. Then we've heard about different ways in which people have used EntreComp to create value, to make it relevant to new audiences, to create guides, tools for new audiences. We then discussed, well, people are implementing it. And at policy level, this may be exploring it within, you know, looking at it in a systemic way to see, well, which skills are we developing through our current activity, and then adapting, designing new curriculum. And then we look at, so appraising and assessing, we look at then implementing in the learning experience and the guidance that goes out to teachers, and then recognizing that through validating the activity that's going on, perhaps through this sort of example from Finland, but also then who are using it for an evaluation approach, but also then through Luxembourg, who are planning to develop skills-based qualifications at national level. And then we've heard from iLink, who have really sort of worked around creating a community interest in this. And indeed, a very fabulous teacher from Greece, Maria Saogiadaki, she shared on Twitter a picture of her EntreComp giant, which she'd developed through the iLink MOOC. And that's a case study, that's an example within the EntreComp Into Action user guide, because it's just a lovely example of a teacher thinking, well, how can I keep this present in my teaching? How can I make this thinking, this skills mindset approach central to my classroom and to what I do with the young people I support to learn. And that's her way. She created the EntreComp. I recommend you go and have a look. It's a lovely example. Now, looking at that, you know, when we think about the policy level, you know, it is about who would benefit from understanding that simple model, who would benefit from perhaps coming together and understanding a common language around entrepreneurship education, around that key competence, because there is, and I think many of us realize, such a diverse set of examples. Apologies, I've just been told I haven't got my webcam on. Hello again. And then, you know, we think, well, if you think about your work and your activity at policy, what areas of policy are addressing these skills? You know, where are these skills being developed? Is it explicit? One second. There we go. I am now sharing my camera. Hello. Is it explicit within your work, these skills? Are you monitoring or evaluating these? Is EntreComp something that can support you to do that? Where is the potential for EntreComp in your work? And perhaps the first question is that we've got a poll here. Are you already using EntreComp? I think we've got some answers coming in already. So are you already using it? Are you planning to use it? Are you not sure? See how it goes? Thinking about, you know, what are your first steps into this, or you have no plans in place right now? So we've got a variety, a few different responses coming through. What I'd like to see, I mean, there's some people saying we're already using it, and there's some 5 people saying we're planning to use it. Please have, you know, add into the chat box here down below, how are you using EntreComp? And just to let you know, we haven't got a PowerPoint up at the moment. Perhaps we can put the holding slide up. But what you should be able to see is that poll at the moment. Okay, so we've got a few different people coming through to type some comments. Now, with EntreComp, it is a tool that I think hopefully we've also represented this morning. It works in a variety of situations. This is not something that is only relevant to perhaps business-related activities, so the economics or economy-related topics. This is something that you can equally develop entrepreneurial skills in any type of subject. It depends sometimes on the way you're teaching. It depends sometimes on the context of your teaching to bring in those crucial elements that make it more entrepreneurial. That's somewhere where the iLink MOOC was particularly effective in illustrating that, illustrating how you can transform and adapt learning to be more entrepreneurial, to produce these kind of skills outcomes that we're seeking. But equally then it's important to try and recognize those skills outcomes. And sometimes this can be a policy issue, because if a school is not able to recognize the value of these skills and thus be valued for developing those skills, then perhaps this is something that needs to be addressed at policy level. So it's your pathway into using EntreComp. We've got the votes in for are you already using? We've got 5 people already using it, 7 planning to use it. Is there anyone that's willing to share in the chat box, how are you planning to use it, or how are you already using it? If you'd like to chat into the chat, just type into the chat box a couple of examples, that would be great. Because I think so Anya Bourgeois is from Eurydice at the European Commission, and Eurydice and the European Commission are considering indicators on entrepreneurship education at school and would use EntreComp as a reference. And that's really that, to have a common understanding when analysing how entrepreneurial learning, how the key competence is being embedded into education. And I think that's particularly important when we consider if there is an indicator on entrepreneurship education, it needs to represent and be meaningful to countries across Europe and the work they're doing, the diversity of work they're doing. In many countries, policymakers talk about the diversity of entrepreneurial learning. Sometimes they're really translating that into a wide breadth of entrepreneurial activities happening in schools, both from a pedagogical development of teachers through to recommendations on diverse actions such as entrepreneurial project-based learning, challenge-based learning as in the Youth Start project, and looking at sort of community challenges, creativity challenges, where learners are encouraged to go out and connect with the community to develop their understanding of context and problem-based learning. So, you know, looking at a challenge and looking at a problem in the community and seeing how they can address that, ideating around it and looking at the best source of action. So perhaps we go on to the next question we have, and this would be an open conversation. What you've heard today is a diverse set of examples, as we said. What would be, from this work today, from what you've heard today, what action can you take to share this EntreComp Interaction user guide? One of the tasks, I think, I'm an ex-policymaker. I used to work for Welsh Government, I used to work for the European Commission, I now run a non-profit on entrepreneurial learning. Note I'm quite keen on this topic. but it's what is the action that policymakers can take? One action, one very simple action, is to share the information with your networks, with your country. What action can you take to share the EntreComp Interaction User Guide? It's been very well received generally, which I'm pleased about because I was very involved in the development of it. But what one action can you take? We've got a chat box open at the top, and hopefully we can get some and it's open text, so please just add in a comment. The other thing here is we've got a comment coming in. Margherita, you want to make a comment on gender awareness, and that's very important when we come to entrepreneurial learning. So please,
yes.
Please go ahead. Would you like
yes,
to come
I would like to can you hear me?
Your microphone. Please continue to add your thoughts into the question on which one simple action can you take to share EntreComp Interaction User Guide, and this really is part a core action at policy level, because you have strong networks across your country, your region.
In the meanwhile, I would like just to call the attention. Can you hear me?
And we can hear your
Can you hear me?
About gender awareness.
What's happening? Can you hear? I think the other people can hear me. Enrique says they can hear. Yeah. So what I want to say is that in general, entrepreneurship, being an entrepreneur, if we close our eyes and think about an entrepreneur, I guess that the majority of people will think about a male entrepreneur. There is a cultural pressure to think being entrepreneurial as being Mark Zuckerberg. This is what we think first. In most cases. So there is also some sort of resistance to the notion of entrepreneurial learning as associated to an heroic figure that is difficult to take as a reference for fostering entrepreneurial learning. This I've already addressed in my speech. Entrepreneurial learning is for everyone. But what is important is that, or another aspect that is I take care of highlighting, is that in the EntreComp we took great care in creating a framework that is gender neutral and embraces diversity. So we took, in the language we chose for each of the competencies and learning outcomes, we have been very well aware of gender issues. And for instance, one example is the emphasis on risk-taking. In general, when people talk about entrepreneurial learning, they emphasize risk-taking. Risk-taking, however, is considered a way of phrasing the fact that when you endeavor in a value-creating activity, you have to take calculated risks. Focusing on risk-taking is creating this mythical figure of the hero who takes risks, generally a male figure against the female figure. So we took the opportunity to define the competencies coping with uncertainty, ambiguity, and risk to make it more open and gender neutral in a way. Just as a comment, that are things that are not written in the framework, but whenever we have the chance to talk about it, it is nice to highlight, to express also the depth of thinking that is behind this flat Excel table that you can see in the framework.
Thank you. I think I'm just looking at some of the comments coming through on what action can we take to share this EntreComp Interaction User Guide. And one of them is to share and use this tool in our strategy of employability and entrepreneurship. I think that that's fantastic. Now, it would be, some of these ideas coming through are great. What is important, I think, also to flag up is the Youth Start project was a randomized control trial project. Have a look at the user guide to see a sort of example, a case study on the project. And I think one of the most interesting results coming through from that, which is one of the more concrete evaluated with control trial, which is an expensive, and well-recognized way of demonstrating the impact of an approach, is that it's not one of the more stark results is the impact on learner engagement, that this challenge-based learning approach from Youth Start is actually encouraging, and the impact then on inclusion. We've also seen some results from youth work and the entrepreneurial mindset supporting inclusion, and I think that's something to bring out as well, this diversity of impact that's emerging. We're creating that body of evidence on impact in order to provide backup for what policymakers need to do, which is evidence-based policymaking. But it's interesting that the emerging evidence is that obviously there is an impact on future success. There is an impact on, if you're looking at awareness raising on business startup, there can be an impact on startup rates depending on the program you're using. But this learner engagement, social inclusion, is something that really emphasizes the broad impact of these skills, this mindset that can be developed through practical entrepreneurial learning that is student-centered. And the way, this is where you can think of EntreComp as a flexible tool across different areas of policy, from education to employment, to economic development, to social inclusion as well. So we've got some excellent ideas on sharing the EntreComp Into Action user guide. The second question I think I'd like to ask is what is the action that we can take? What is your takeaway from this discussion today? We've got a few minutes left, I hope, but what is the takeaway? What simple action are you inspired to take following this webinar? I think one action that I work for Bantani Education. We are a dedicated organization on entrepreneurial learning across different sectors of lifelong learning. And one thing I think is to really perhaps create a blog post, create a little article from this exercise to highlight some of the feedback that you've given, and top 10 tips for policymakers perhaps. I think also within the user guide you can go to, off the top of my head, page 24, possibly 25, and look at the top tips to get started, because those are relevant to organizations but also relevant to policymakers. We look at thinking about your audience, thinking about what could be useful there. That's great, yeah. One simple action, share information and presentations with educators. I think that's key. Leaders as well, within a school environment, within a college environment, within a university environment as well. Often the culture it can be set by the leadership, and the leadership to be brought on board with this sometimes new approach to learning can be very important to support the people delivering the learning on the ground. And that's something that really has come through a range of different actions, from looking at sort of creating champions within institutions, creating lead teachers, to perhaps the HE Innovate initiative, which looks at sort of an entrepreneurial university in order to support this approach across internationalization, across leadership, across culture, across evaluation. And all of this will then support teaching and learning as well, quality and content. So that's great. We're getting some great ideas through. So yeah, this is my commitment. I will do a blog post or an article on supporting policy and what would be the top tips that perhaps I've learned from this session, and I've learned from my own experience on introducing something like EntreComp. Any other questions that you'd like us to ask? Please pop them in the chat box. I think, yeah, we've got some possible future proposal targeting different topics: STEM, leadership, ICT through EntreComp. There's a couple of examples within the user guide that actually look to co-work DigComp and EntreComp. So looking at that digitally enabled learning, digital learning, what are the key competences a learner should be able to demonstrate through their education experience in terms of their digital competence, and really looking at, how can we combine the two? So in some ways, what digital competences enable us to be more entrepreneurial? What entrepreneurial competences cross over with those within digital? you know, you look at sort of problem solving, you look at lateral thinking, that problem solving and creativity are particular areas which cross over both. I read absolutely. I think our colleagues from European Training Foundation have flagged up the European Training Foundation Entrepreneurship Key Competence Award. That's looking for good practice in entrepreneurship education, and there will be a focus on EntreComp within that. They are great advocates for this work. That's coming out on the 4th of April, and the award ceremony will be during the 2018 EU Vocational Skills Week, which is somewhere around November. So please look out for that. And that, I believe, from the top of my head, will be relevant to both member states, but also then countries partnering, countries surrounding the European Union, Eastern Partnership countries, Southeast Europe, and South Mediterranean countries. So that would be a great opportunity to look at, to perhaps explore that as a means of profiling for those countries, those regions, those policymakers who are already taking action in EntreComp. And yes, share and inform with the beneficiaries of the Erasmus Plus programme for youth, definitely. The crossover on some of the methodologies, perhaps there's a real opportunity to connect non-formal and formal learning through this entrepreneurial learning approach because of the nature of the methodologies that you can potentially use, and this engagement with community, with business, with stakeholders outside the school environment. It can be a great tool to create that crossover, and also to look at mapping the impact, to look at identifying what skills you're activating in the young people through your youth programs as well. There's some great ideas here coming through, brilliant. And someone said share this information with school leaders, absolutely. Having worked with schools and universities in Wales, I think there's a real need to target both leaders and educators to support, so they can drive this as a whole school approach. I think one thing that perhaps hasn't come through is citizenship. We talk sometimes now about entrepreneurial citizenship, and this is something that these skills, if you look at the skills associated with active citizenship, with being a responsible member of society, to creating, being aware of the challenges that society is facing, being aware of, my role as a global citizen, there are methodologies, tools, and certainly this skill set, this mindset is very relevant to that as it is to other sort of thematic domains such as STEM as well, or STEAM. So, okay. Well, I think we've got some great examples there. I'd like to ask one more question, and this very much is something that will be, I think, our concluding question for this webinar, is what, from your perspective as policymakers, could happen next? And I'm going to look across to my lovely colleague Asi and say, could you just open another poll, and what support is needed next? And this could be, this is a question to say, well, you've got EntreComp the framework. It's an EU framework. It's being profiled through the upcoming vision of the Key Competence Framework for lifelong learning. It was launched within the EU's skills agenda for Europe. It's being profiled in a number of different countries at national level. What support, in your view, thinking about this right now and thinking about your work, what support do you need to help you implement? Is there anything that could happen? And this could be something, it could be that perhaps we need a MOOC for policymakers to guide, to really share ideas, share practice, inspire new thinking. Is it that we need a simple guide? I mean, I've committed to writing an article, but that's one page. Do we need a sort of a simple guide? Do you need, is there an opportunity to create an open forum, an online discussion portal, a couple of webinars again around specific topics, sort of thematic topics on EntreComp? Is this, someone's popped up training, teachers training, certainly. I'm involved in the EntreComp for Educators project, which is looking to establish a professional skills framework for teachers. for them to deliver and be able to facilitate entrepreneurial learning. So looking at not the entrepreneurial teacher, but the teacher who can deliver and inspire and facilitate entrepreneurial learning in their students. And there will be teacher training alongside that, and I'd be very happy to, if you go to, we haven't got a website yet, but if you Google EntreComp for Educators, I think you'll find our Twitter account and you can follow us on there, and we'll share the website when that's available. Perhaps any other ideas? So we've got collaborative work, open forum, short implementation guide, absolutely, per field educational level. So quite detailed then, you're looking at quite a detailed guide. Teachers training, more information, interactive material. I would recommend that you go to see the iLink MOOC because the resources are still online and they're really great. There's also a series of short films, 3 minutes, on YouTube, which have been developed by JRC, by Margherita's team, and also the team here at European Schoolnet on each competence. There's 15 films and one overview. So different people from across Europe talking about what this means. What does this vision competence mean? How can you think about this in terms of teaching? Okay, great. Any more examples? Well, you've got 74 in the EntreComp Interaction User Guide. I recommend you go and have a look. Any questions on that? Of course, you know, please, you can, if you put the hashtag EntreComp Interaction on Twitter, or ask the question to @EU_Science Hub, which is the JRC Twitter account, then, you know, you can find, they will come back to you. You can also copy me in, and we'll try and guide you through. If you've got any questions, we can direct you to the people who've actually contributed those examples as well. So there's 74 in there to start with, 35 case studies and around 34 tools. Supporting translation and contextualization, that is something that we need to explore. It is a challenge. You know, it would be, you can translate a PDF online, but it doesn't, as Margherita mentioned with the Greek translation, it doesn't offer you that depth of understanding and that true translation of the meaning behind these words. Entrepreneurship can be a word that means, that directly translated can take you into a realm which you didn't intend to go into. Okay, are there any last questions that you would like myself or any of our experts to answer? Otherwise, we'll come to a close here today. I'm just seeing in the chat box, if you go to the School Education Gateway, perhaps we can put the link into the chat box for the page which illustrates the different YouTube films. We'll put the link to the School Education Gateway Collaborative Space page, which has all of those videos there as well. Okay, so I think thank you very much for your participation. I think from a European Schoolnet DG Education perspective, we will take away the results and the input that you've given us, because each of your comments allows us insight into your thinking, your stage of work, and what perhaps the next steps could be to support you, because this is a European-wide initiative. EntreComp is about helping young people, all types of learners, to develop their potential. And this is a potential for life, for work, for employment, for self-employment. And this is where we are working for a common interest. So the EntreComp framework it's there at European level, it's being launched, there is a commitment to drive it forward, there are different ideas and initiatives, there are upwards of 30, 40 current Erasmus Plus projects looking at EntreComp and developing it further. You know, we need to look at ways to share this to share this more widely. But please, from your perspective, as a policymaker, this is something that please share. Your role is to share EntreComp to your networks, that who you think would be relevant to see this, and perhaps even to those that you might not think is so relevant, that might not be interested to see it. Because I think just profiling this entrepreneurial skills and mindset concept is important. Explore how you can use it for yourself, which can then think about it in different areas of your life, which can help to open up thinking around different areas of policy and practice that your government or regional organisation is involved with. And then use. How can you use it? What would be your next steps? What support do you need? And please feel free to get in touch, to join the collaborative space on entrepreneurship education so that we can support you to implement this in your context, in your setting. This is a flexible framework. It's adaptable. There's nothing fixed around it. People have already chosen 13 of the 15 competencies to prioritize that. You know, there is ways that it can be adapted to suit your work, your context. So without further ado, I say thank you to all of our presenters, Tomislava from European Schoolnet, Margherita from Joint Research Centre. Really enjoyed your contributions, and I thank all of you for yours too. Thank you very much for being part of it, and I hope to see you on another webinar with the School Education Gateway Collaborative Space soon. We'll let you know when those are happening. Thank you very much. Really pleased to have been involved.